Elias Ward adjusted his oxygen regulator as he sank beneath the thick, teal waters of Tiravel's upper ocean shelf. The dive suit, though cutting-edge, groaned slightly under the pressure of the planet's gelatinous currents. His mission was routine, chart safe zones for future mining operations, but something felt off. The sonar scanner blinked erratically, then let out a sharp pulse. Not mechanical. Biological. A distress signal. He paused, floating mid-current, listening to the fading blip echo through the dense water. A sudden spike, faint but rhythmic, matched the cadence of a mammalian heart. Someone, or something, was in trouble. Protocol dictated he report anomalies before engaging, but instinct pressed him forward. He tightened his grip on the propulsion grip and surged toward the source. Visibility dropped. The water was cluttered with strands of deep-sea algae, reflective scales, and fragments of what looked like torn fabric. Then he saw it, a tangled figure, limbs twitching weakly, trapped in strands of synthetic mesh. Not human. A long, furred tail swirled through the current. Sharp, forward-facing eyes blinked slowly under transparent lids. The creature's body shuddered once, then went limp. Elias didn't hesitate. He reached the figure in seconds, slicing through the netting with the utility blade on his glove. The fibers resisted, military-grade tensile weave. Someone had deliberately left this trap. He freed the limbs first, jointed like a terrestrial wolf's but too long, too sinuous. The gills fluttered faintly, then went still. He wrapped an arm around the creature's torso and kicked hard toward the surface, lungs burning. The ascent dragged at him. Tiravel's currents weren't hostile, but their density slowed every movement. By the time he broke through the surface, his HUD was flashing red from oxygen depletion. Dragging the body onto the flat stone shoreline near his mobile lab, he stripped off his helmet and pulled the creature close. No pulse. The gills weren't moving. Desperate, he improvised, placing his hands over where he estimated the creature's primary lung sac would be. He applied rhythmic pressure, then exhaled into the partially open mouth. The skin was cooler than expected, slick, and faintly bioluminescent. Nothing. He repeated the compressions, the breath transfers, alternating until his arms ached. Then, finally, a jerk. The gills flexed open with a ragged spasm, spewing a thin stream of murky water. The eyes shot open, glowing a soft, frightened violet. The creature scrambled backward, wheezing, claws tearing shallow furrows into the stone, but it couldn't stand. Elias didn't move. He raised his hands slowly, palms forward, heart pounding. The creature stared at him, chest heaving. Then it made a low, clicking sound, somewhere between a growl and a whimper. He stayed still, allowing it to observe him without threat. Minutes passed before the alien's panic faded into weak trembling. Its body collapsed back against the stone. Elias reached into his pack and gently slid a hydration capsule toward it. The creature sniffed it, then clumsily licked at the edges, its long tongue flicking the moisture inward. Elias kept his voice low. "You're safe. No more drowning." It didn't respond, but its gaze never left him. He noticed then, beneath its forelimbs, along the ribs, bruising. Sharp, uneven patterns that weren't consistent with net entrapment. He leaned slightly to get a better look. Scorch marks? Some old, some fresh. A few had blistered open. He frowned. A predator wouldn't use fire. And no natural force would burn in water. These were deliberate wounds. He sat back, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The alien hadn't just gotten caught in a net. It had been fleeing something. Or someone. The urgency in its initial sonar pulses, too rhythmic to be random, hadn't been blind panic. It had been calculated. A call for help. A plea meant to be heard. Elias keyed open a private log and recorded a quick note: location, time, condition of the alien, and the nature of the wounds. He hesitated before submitting the entry to Mission Control. The Terran Council had strict rules regarding native contact. Any interference could jeopardize diplomatic relations. But this wasn't an anthropological curiosity. This was someone in pain, someone who had nearly died. He looked back at the creature, now curled slightly, watching him through half-lidded eyes. Its chest rose and fell in slow, shallow rhythms. It wasn't sleeping. It was watching. Assessing. He stood up, backing toward the edge of the shelter. "I'll keep the fire low," he said softly. "No loud sounds. No movement." He set a thermal shield around the area to preserve warmth, then activated a passive perimeter scan. Not for predators. For others. Whoever had left that net might not be far. Inside the shelter, the alien let out a low, rumbling sigh. It wasn't a threat. It was exhausted. Still alive. Still fighting to breathe. Elias sat near the entrance, gaze locked on the alien's silhouette. Something told him this was only the beginning. The creature didn't sleep. Its breathing remained shallow, and its eyes tracked Elias's every move. By morning, it had repositioned itself away from the heat source, closer to the shelter's moisture vents. It required high humidity, likely an amphibious species. Elias adjusted the humidity levels and brought over a container of enriched water. The alien examined it, then dipped a clawed hand in and slowly drank. Elias observed closely, noting details: 4 fingers, opposable thumb, fur that shifted and shaded slightly depending on its temperature. The creature wasn't just intelligent, it was highly adapted. Still weak, it moved only in short, cautious bursts. When Elias returned from a short supply run, he found it drawing patterns in the wet stone using its claw. The patterns weren't random. Symmetry. Repetition. Structure. Elias sat down across from it and waited. The creature paused, then slowly etched a shape, a curved triangle with a vertical slash through it. Then a series of dots. It tapped its chest and repeated the triangle slash. Elias pointed at it. "That's you?" It tapped its chest again, then looked at him. Another series of shapes followed. Different symbols. They looked like names. The creature stopped at one, scratched a line through it, and tapped its own chest again. A gesture of rejection. Disownment. The meaning settled in slowly. This creature wasn't just stranded, it was separated from others of its kind. Rejected. Exiled. Possibly hunted. Elias tried not to let his expression change, but something in his eyes must have shifted. The creature noticed and stilled. Slowly, deliberately, it raised its hand and traced a mark across its upper torso, just under the throat. A scar. Not visible, but deeply symbolic. A brand? Elias opened a holographic map of the region and expanded the nearby Thalray territories. He pointed at the closest cluster of settlements. The creature looked, then turned its head away sharply. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Without warning, it let out a low pulse, soft, vibratory. A kind of sonar. Elias's translator didn't register words, but the pattern was intentional. A sequence. Short, clipped bursts. He ran the pulse through a filter. The code wasn't linguistic. It was emotional, tonal. And it carried fear. Elias stood, accessing his logs from the last diplomatic summit. The Thalray were classified as semi-aquatic, high intelligence, rigid social caste structure. Their communication had baffled Earth linguists, part bioacoustic, part visual, part chemical. Complex. He flipped to a page on youth rights. One phrase stood out. Bloodwater Ascension. He glanced at the creature. Its flank rose and fell, its gaze downcast. He made a mental connection. Bloodwater Ascension was a ceremonial trial, violent, possibly lethal. The rite required juveniles to fight peers. Refusal meant shame. Disgrace. Elias looked back at the earlier drawing. One of the symbols had been struck out. A name. A sibling? His gut twisted. He activated the passive calm scanner, sweeping local frequencies for unregistered signals. There it was, faint, intermittent sonar pulses on an encrypted loop. Nothing he recognized. But the creature sat upright the moment it played. Its ears twitched, and it stared out into the water, unmoving. Elias muted the loop. The alien's posture slumped. Recognition. Not hope. Dread. The net hadn't been accidental. It was sent by its own people. Maybe family? Maybe enforcers? Elias felt his pulse quicken. He accessed the transmission logs and noticed a classified channel activated 2 days prior. Someone had logged the presence of a rogue juvenile Thalray in the area. That alert had been followed by a coded silence request. He turned to the creature, his voice low. "They tried to kill you!" It didn't answer, but its eyes didn't move. He approached slowly and crouched down, pointing to himself. "Elias!" Then pointed at the creature. It hesitated. Then carefully tapped the triangle / symbol and exhaled softly, *Kirul, *. He repeated it. "Kirul!" A low hum vibrated through the air. Agreement. Kirul extended one claw, tapped Elias's wrist where his biomonitor blinked, then dragged his claw along Elias's skin in a small arc. A gesture. Connection. Trust? Elias nodded slowly. He accessed a restricted file, encrypted it, and logged the entire interaction, setting it to manual dispatch only. No automatic uploads. Whatever was happening here wasn't covered in any handbook. The diplomatic corps wouldn't see Kirul as a victim. They'd see him as a liability. A breach of cultural respect. They wouldn't protect him. He wouldn't be returned to his people. He'd be erased. Elias looked at Kirul, who had lowered his head to rest again. The young alien's breathing was steadier now. He wasn't afraid of Elias anymore. But he was still terrified of everything else. Elias leaned against the far wall, watching the soft glow of Kirul's gills pulse in the low light. This wasn't just a rescue. This was a secret that could fracture the alliance between Earth and the Thalray. And Elias had already made his choice. Kirul grew more responsive with each passing cycle. His wounds closed faster than expected, hinting at a regenerative trait. Elias noted the changes, fur darkening at the ridges, tail movements becoming sharper, and the subtle shift in posture from cautious to alert. The symbols he drew each day became more structured. What started as disconnected marks now formed sequences. One cluster repeated often, 3 vertical lines crossed by a jagged slash. Elias matched the symbol to an archived Thalray caste insignia. It marked the High Brood, the apex bloodline within their ruling class. Kirul wasn't an outcast by birth. He was descended from leadership. That single fact redrew the entire situation. Over the next 2 days, Kirul began to mimic Elias's words, not with sound, but through gesture and visual symbols. Communication formed, crude but functional. Using a combination of shapes and positions, Kirul reconstructed a timeline. He had 3 siblings. 1 older, 2 younger. During the trial, he had been ordered to kill the youngest in a ritualized arena beneath their oceanic spires. He refused. The refusal wasn't an act of rebellion, it was instinctive. Kirul had stayed his claw. The result was immediate disgrace. Stripped of name symbol, branded with exile, and escorted under guard toward the abyssal trench, where failed broodlings were offered to predators in silence. He'd escaped during transport, wounded but determined. Elias realized he wasn't dealing with a rogue juvenile. Kirul had defied one of the oldest rites in Thalray history. His survival wasn't just inconvenient, it was subversive. A deep-sea relay beacon, long dormant, activated briefly during the night. Elias's scanners registered a coded ping, a Class 3 trace directive. Reserved for political fugitives. The beacon's log showed the directive matched the signature of a Thalray internal warrant. No open declaration. No formal pursuit. Just quiet erasure. He cross-referenced the code with archived diplomatic files. The trace directive required a deniable outcome. Capture was optional. Death preferred. Elias sat with that knowledge for hours. The alliance between Earth and the Thalray depended on mutual non-interference. They maintained peace by ignoring what the other side found sacred. But now Elias held a living contradiction to Thalray orthodoxy. One that, if exposed, could ignite diplomatic backlash or worse, retribution. Kirul didn't sleep much. He began pacing the interior of the shelter, mimicking sonar patterns that reflected unease. Elias noticed his claws clicking in a rhythm. Not random, intentional. A beat. A call. Kirul was trying to stay oriented. To keep from forgetting himself. Elias modified a training slate to accept pattern input and taught Kirul how to build structured sequences. Within a day, Kirul had mapped a detailed rendering of the Blood Arena, an underwater coliseum carved into coral, framed in bioluminescent spires. He traced the exit path he used, including pressure ridges and a coral breach zone. It wasn't just a map. It was testimony. He included names, symbols for each sibling. The one he spared had been dragged away. The oldest had struck him in anger. No mercy. No hesitation. Elias saw the pain buried beneath Kiril's composure. For a fleeting moment, Elias considered what would have happened if a Thalray had witnessed a human act like Kiril had. Refusing a kill. Showing mercy. They'd call it weakness. They'd say humanity had infected him. That possibility chilled him. Elias compiled the data into a sealed file, every symbol, sequence, memory. He encoded it as a visual log and flagged it under Humanitarian Protection Clause 9C. The clause hadn't been invoked in decades. It allowed a human operative to protect a sentient being under credible threat of species-sanctioned execution. Invoking it would signal mistrust. Earth's neutrality would be compromised. But leaving Kiril unprotected was equivalent to delivering him back for execution. Kiril stood at the shelter's edge, gazing at the water. The scars across his torso now seemed deeper, less physical, more symbolic. He didn't belong anywhere now, not among his people, not yet with Elias. Elias handed him the slate. You survived their judgment. That means something. Kiril's eyes shifted, unsure. But he accepted the slate and marked one more symbol, a small, closed circle split from within. It was not a name. It was a concept. Change. Elias nodded. The file was ready. All that remained was a transmission. Once it left the shelter, Earth Command would know everything. They would either protect Kiril or bury the evidence to preserve the Alliance. Either way, Elias had taken a side. He looked at the alien one more time. Kiril wasn't just a refugee. He was a threat to the order his species had lived by for centuries. And the only reason he was alive was because a human diver couldn't watch someone drown. The message was sent. Elias encrypted the transmission, routed it through 3 private satellites, and disguised the signature as a geological survey. It carried every record he'd compiled, the drawings, the testimony, the biological data, and the precise terms of Clause 9C. Once opened, the Council would be forced to respond. Until then, Elias was on his own. Kiril knew. He had watched the upload indicator blink and dim. Since then, he spoke less, moved less. His calm wasn't peace. It was preparation. Something in him had shifted again, less fear, more restraint. As if he sensed time running short. Within 20 hours, the first signal came. A Terran diplomatic vessel passed overhead, silent. No communication. Its ID beacon flickered once, then went dark. 5 minutes later, Kiril growled low in his throat and pressed his ear against the shelter's stone floor. Elias checked external scans. Sonar pulses, broadband, multidirectional. Not a search. A warning. Another hour passed. Then a second ping, this one from under the sea shelf. Elias narrowed the signal band. Thalray origin. Patterned like a migration pulse, but too regular. It was a tracker. The hunt had begun. Kiril didn't hide. He walked out of the shelter, shoulders upright, eyes glowing faintly. He didn't run. Elias followed, knowing they had limited options. Extraction protocols required authorization, which hadn't arrived. That meant no evac, no safe zone. Elias was tethered to the alien until Earth responded, or until someone forced his hand. Kiril stopped near the shallows and made 3 sharp clicks. A low response echoed back. Elias knew that tone. A locator call. The kind used by military pathfinders. Kiril had activated it without hesitation. Elias grabbed his shoulder. What are you doing? Kiril turned, eyes steady, then drew a symbol in the sand, an open triangle, bleeding outward. Sacrifice. Not surrender. Elias understood immediately. Kirul wasn't giving up. He was luring them. Before Elias could stop him, Kirul dove into the water. His form blurred, sleek and fast beneath the surface. Elias activated his dive gear and followed, descending quickly into the dense currents. Kirul led him downward, weaving through rocky ridges and coral towers, then stopped near a cavern where the water shimmered faintly with energy residue. The place had been used before. Within minutes, 3 dark shapes approached from the deep. Thalray sentinels, larger, armored, their sonar clicking in tight, coded bursts. They carried shock lances, not designed to kill, but to paralyze. Elias froze behind a coral spire, watching. Kirul hovered openly. He didn't resist. The lead sentinel approached and aimed his weapon, sending a short charge into Kirul's shoulder. The young alien flinched but didn't fall. He released a pulse, 3 short tones, then silence. Elias had heard it before. The exact pattern Kirul had used when Elias first found him. The sentinel paused. Something shifted in the water. The current itself stilled. Then Kirul released a second pulse, long, rising, sharp at the end. The tone vibrated through the trench. A challenge. The sentinels hesitated. One responded with a matching tone but altered the final note. A countercall. Kirul darted forward, striking the weapon hand of the closest sentinel. A bold move. Not lethal, but symbolic. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was asserting a right to exist. The other 2 surged forward. Elias moved instinctively, firing a low-grade sonic burst to scatter them. The blast disrupted their formation. In the chaos, Kirul twisted upward, dragging one of the sentinels into a narrow crevice, disarming him. Elias fired a flare, drawing their attention long enough for Kirul to escape the ambush zone. The water shimmered again, another presence inbound. This one Terran. A submersible broke through the top of the reef, painted in black and gold. Not civilian. Not rescue. Intelligence division. The kind that cleaned up problems. A tight bend message blinked into Elias's HUD. Stand down. Custody required. Elias ignored it. He opened his own channel, broadcasting encrypted footage of the skirmish. Unlawful engagement against a protected entity under active humanitarian clause. Evidence archived. Confirm response. Silence. Then another ping. Authorization granted. Temporary asylum status under Clause 9C, pending review. The intelligence vessel hesitated. Then it rose slowly, retreating into upper orbit. The Thalray sentinels regrouped, collected their wounded, and began withdrawal. No further attack. Message received. Kirul surfaced minutes later, panting, his shoulders scorched but intact. Elias helped him ashore. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Kirul hadn't just survived again. He had declared himself. Not by violence, but by refusing submission. And now, the galaxy had seen it. The days that followed were tense but quiet. Kirul remained close to the shelter, seldom straying far from Elias. The wound on his shoulder scabbed and peeled, revealing fresh skin beneath. No scars remained, his body didn't hold on to physical damage, but the weight in his gaze hadn't lifted. His silence wasn't from fear anymore. It was calculation. Elias spent hours reviewing the footage, transcripts, and signals. Every piece of data had been sent to Earth Command, but no directives followed. Just silence. A deliberate kind. The kind governments used when something inconvenient needed time to settle. The alliance with the Thalray was too important. And Kirul's existence too dangerous. But the truth was now documented, verified, and distributed to internal channels. It couldn't be buried. Others would see it. Some would question what had happened in the deep. Others would pretend they hadn't read it at all. Elias had been in this game long enough to know how bureaucracy handled revelations. With delay, not denial. Kirul sensed the shift too. His drawings changed, less about symbols and memory, more about motion and divergence. He etched spirals, disrupted patterns, mirrored glyphs. Not warnings. Not threats. Possibilities. Futures he couldn't yet reach. One morning, he approached Elias with a slate and carefully traced a series of looping arcs. It was a path, one leading away from Thalray territory, through neutral zones, into the borderless stretches where no species held claim. He tapped it once and looked up. He was asking to go. Not to run. To become something else. Something outside the system that had condemned him. Elias didn't answer right away. He studied the map, then Kiril's eyes. There was no fear left. Just determination. The kind of clarity only those who had nothing left could afford. Later that day, the final message arrived. Earth Command issued a private closure. Subject Kiril designated non-political entity. No further diplomatic action required. Status archived. Not denied. Not approved. Just buried. That was the answer Elias expected. And the permission he didn't need. He prepared supplies, compressed rations, data slates, a portable biosphere module. Kiril watched silently but helped organize, his movements methodical. When it was finished, they stood side by side near the edge of the reef. Kiril turned and tapped the air with his claw, then gestured toward Elias. A farewell, not of submission, but of gratitude. He wasn't asking to be followed. Elias extended his wrist. Kiril leaned in and tapped the biomonitor softly, one final connection. Then he stepped into the water, vanishing beneath the waves with a final pulse that echoed like a whisper. Elias stood there long after he was gone. Not waiting, just letting it settle. The sea, now calm, held no trace of what had happened. He returned to the shelter, now stripped of secrecy. The symbols Kiril had drawn were still etched into the stone walls. Elias scanned them, preserving each one. History written without words. In the following months, whispers circulated across research outposts and military archives. A rogue Thalray juvenile. An unsanctioned trace directive. An interference by a human diver. None of it officially confirmed. But the footage surfaced in small circles, leaked, analyzed, then debated in encrypted forums. Some called it a breach of protocol. Others called it an act of reckless compassion. A few called it treason. But others, quietly in corners that mattered, called it proof. That a Thalray could choose mercy. That their ancient rights weren't absolute. That maybe, just maybe, the rigid order they had lived under wasn't inviolable. And for those who saw deeper, it was something more. It was the story of a human who didn't ask questions before saving a life. And an alien who learned that survival didn't have to come through violence. Kiril became a myth. No sightings. No signals. Just the story of what he did, and what he refused to do. He didn't become a leader or a warrior. He became a crack in the armor of an unchanging empire. Elias received no medals, no reprimands, no mentions in any official record. He resumed his assignments, quieter, more careful, always watching for strange signals from open space. Every so often, his receiver caught faint pulses, too faint to trace, but never random. He knew the cadence. Somewhere out in the dark, Kiril lived. Not hiding. Just moving forward. Choosing his own path, far from the expectations of species or protocol. It was more than Elias had hoped for. And far more than anyone else would ever understand.